In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood, where the homes are neat, the lawns are trimmed, and the streets hum with the comfortable rhythm of middle-class America, Daniel Thompson pulled into his driveway. It was late, later than usual, after a grueling day at the engineering firm where he worked. The house was dark, save for a single light glowing through the kitchen window. His wife, Rachel, must have waited up for him, though lately, her patience had worn thin. Daniel sat in the car for a moment, his fingers tapping on the steering wheel. His head ached from the endless meetings and deadlines that had consumed him, but what weighed on him more was the growing distance between him and Rachel. 10 years of marriage had drifted into something unfamiliar, something cold. He had noticed her subtle hints, the disappointed looks, the frustrated sighs, and the ever-present tension in her voice. Still, tonight felt different. She had texted him earlier, "We need to talk." Rachel had always been a practical woman. At 38, she managed a demanding career in marketing at a large firm and juggled the responsibilities of their household with efficiency. She was sharp, beautiful, and confident, but over the past year, her demeanor had shifted. It wasn't just that Daniel was working more, Rachel seemed restless, yearning for something that wasn't there anymore. He exhaled, knowing the conversation he was about to have wasn't going to be easy. Inside, the house smelled of the faint scent of lavender, but there was no warmth. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Daniel," she began softly, "we need to sit down." His stomach clenched. This wasn't the usual small talk about their day or a casual complaint about his late hours. Her tone was serious, and as he took a seat across from her, the air between them thickened. Daniel Thompson, at 40, Daniel was the picture of a man who had once thought he had it all. He had built a successful career as an engineer, spent a decade in a seemingly stable marriage, and lived in a house that many would envy. Yet, despite his hard work and loyalty, his personal life was unraveling. The long hours he spent at the office were taking their toll, not just on him, but on his marriage. He had grown detached, focused on his responsibilities and oblivious to the widening gap between him and Rachel. He was a man of routine, reliable but emotionally distant, perhaps blind to the storm brewing at home. Rachel Thompson, Rachel, at 38, was intelligent, ambitious, and charismatic. She worked as a marketing executive and had always been the kind of woman who turned heads with her presence. But inside, she was frustrated, both with Daniel and with the monotony of her life. The attention she used to receive from her husband had faded, replaced by his work obligations and endless late nights. Feeling neglected, Rachel began seeking validation elsewhere. She still loved Daniel, or so she told herself, but the idea of an affair had crept into her mind, fueled by someone new in her life, Mark. Mark Daniels. Mark was everything Daniel wasn't, at least, that's how Rachel saw him. In his mid-40s, he exuded confidence and charm, with a magnetic personality that drew people in. As Rachel's colleague at the marketing firm, Mark had taken an interest in her, subtly at first, and then more overtly as their friendship deepened. He made her feel seen, desired, and alive in a way Daniel hadn't in years. Mark was bold and unafraid to take risks, and he made no secret of his feelings toward Rachel, encouraging her to step outside the bounds of her marriage. The story takes place in modern-day suburban America, where Daniel and Rachel live in a modest but comfortable home. It's a place that reflects their middle-class lifestyle, a 2-story house with a neatly kept yard, a picket fence, and the usual symbols of success. Their home is meant to be a sanctuary, but for Daniel and Rachel, it has become a battleground, a place where silent tensions simmer just beneath the surface. The neighborhood is quiet, typical of suburban life, where appearances are kept up, but behind closed doors, things often aren't what they seem. As Daniel sat across from Rachel, he could feel the tension radiating from her. Her expression was composed, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She cleared her throat and took a deep breath. "Daniel," she began, her voice shaky but resolute, "I love you. I always have. But, there's something I need to talk to you about, and it's not easy to say." He braced himself, unsure of what was coming next. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them prepared him for what she was about to confess. I've met someone else, Rachel continued, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. His name is Mark, a coworker. And before you say anything, I need you to understand that I'm not in love with him. This isn't about that. It's just physical. The room seemed to spin as Daniel processed her words. He stared at her, speechless, unable to believe what he was hearing. Rachel leaned forward, her voice steady but pleading. I still love you, Daniel. I don't want to leave you. I need something more. Something you haven't been able to give me. Daniel's throat felt tight, his chest heavy. The woman sitting across from him, the woman he had shared his life with for 10 years, was asking for permission to cheat on him. And yet, in her eyes, she believed this was something they could survive, something their marriage could withstand. I want an affair, Rachel said bluntly, her tone pragmatic, as if she were proposing a business arrangement. But it won't change how I feel about you. We can still be together. I just need this. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic storm of disbelief, hurt, and anger. How could she say this? How could she even suggest it? Are you serious? He finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. You think our marriage can survive this? Rachel looked at him, her expression softening but not wavering. I think it's possible, yes. I don't want to lose you, Daniel. But I also don't want to keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. The world as Daniel knew it was crumbling, and all he could do was sit there, stunned, as his wife laid out the impossible. Daniel sat in silence long after Rachel had finished speaking. The weight of her words pressed down on him like an unbearable burden. He felt hollow, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind couldn't make sense of it. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for a decade, was asking him to agree to an affair. His eyes remained fixed on the table, tracing the wood grain as if searching for an answer hidden in its patterns. Rachel, sitting across from him, seemed calm, as though relieved to have finally spoken her truth. But Daniel was drowning in disbelief, confusion, and growing anger. The comfortable life they had built together now felt like an illusion, a fragile thing that had shattered with a few sentences. Say something, Daniel. Rachel's voice broke the silence, soft but insistent. He looked up at her, meeting her eyes for the first time since her confession. How can you think this won't destroy us? His voice was quiet but filled with hurt. Rachel sighed, rubbing her hands together nervously. I don't know, she admitted. I know it's wrong. But I don't see any other way to feel alive again. You've been so distant. You're always at work, always tired. And I've tried to talk to you, but it's like you're not even here anymore. I need something more, Daniel. The words stung like a slap to the face. Daniel knew he had been working long hours, but he had always thought it was for their future, for their stability. He never imagined that in trying to provide, he had been losing her. You think sleeping with another man is going to fix that? His tone was sharper now, his frustration bubbling to the surface. That it's going to make you feel alive? What about us? What about our marriage? Rachel's eyes filled with sadness, but also a determination that chilled him. It's not about love, she said quietly. I still love you. I do. But this is just physical. It doesn't mean I want to end what we have. Daniel shook his head, incredulous. How can you say that? How can you expect me to believe that after you just told me you want to sleep with someone else? Rachel's expression softened, but she didn't back down. I'm not asking you to understand, she said gently, but I'm asking you to accept it. The words hung in the air, and Daniel felt something inside him snap. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it nearly tipped over. I need time to think, he said curtly, his voice tight with emotion. Without waiting for her response, he walked out of the kitchen, heading for the guest room. He couldn't be near her right now. He couldn't look at her. In the days that followed, Daniel moved through life in a daze. He couldn't sleep in their bed anymore, so he stayed in the guest room, barely speaking to Rachel except for the occasional mundane exchange about bills or groceries. The pain of her confession weighed heavily on him, and he was torn between his love for her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Each night, he lay awake, his mind racing with questions. What had gone so wrong? Could their marriage survive this? Did he even want it to? He thought about confronting Mark, the man who had stolen Rachel's attention, but something inside him stopped him. Confrontation wouldn't solve this. It wouldn't change what had already happened in Rachel's heart. But one thing was clear to Daniel: he couldn't sit idly by and let this happen. He needed to know the full truth, to understand how far this had gone. If Rachel was willing to betray him in such a blatant way, then he needed to protect himself. One morning, after Rachel had left for work, Daniel made his decision. He drove to an electronics store and bought surveillance equipment, small recording devices, cameras, anything that would allow him to monitor her actions without her knowing. If she was going to go through with this, he needed evidence. He didn't know what he would do with it yet, but having it would give him some control over the situation. Back at the house, Daniel carefully planted the devices around their home, one in the living room, one in the bedroom, and one in her car. He installed tracking software on her phone, allowing him to see her messages, emails, and call history. It made him feel sick, spying on his own wife like this, but he couldn't let her deceive him without knowing every detail. That evening, when Rachel returned from work, she didn't notice anything different. She still kissed him on the cheek and asked him how his day was, though the warmth in her voice was gone. Their conversations were superficial, hollow reflections of what they had once been. Daniel watched her closely now, noting every glance at her phone, every text she sent while pretending to scroll through social media. He had access to it all, and it only took a few hours before he saw the first message from Mark. Rachel, still good for this weekend? Mark, absolutely. I can't wait to finally spend some time alone with you. Rachel, me too. I need this. Daniel's heart sank as he read the messages. It was real. It wasn't just a fantasy in her mind, she had already made plans to meet him. They were going to a hotel this weekend. He couldn't breathe. It was as if the world was collapsing around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For a moment, he thought about confronting her then and there, demanding she cancel everything, but a darker thought took hold. No. He needed to see this through. He needed to catch them in the act. If she wasn't going to stop, then he needed to make sure he had everything he needed to protect himself, legally, emotionally, financially. The next morning, Daniel called a divorce lawyer. He scheduled a meeting, explaining the situation in brief. The lawyer advised him to collect as much evidence as possible. In cases like these, having proof could give him the upper hand, especially if he wanted to sue Mark for alienation of affection, a rare but viable legal route in their state. Daniel agreed, his resolve hardening. He was no longer the passive husband, hurt and confused by his wife's betrayal. He was preparing for war. Over the next few days, Daniel kept close watch on Rachel's communications with Mark. He listened to their phone calls, where they made plans for a weekend away in a fancy hotel just outside the city. He tracked their emails, their flirtatious exchanges, the growing anticipation between them. Each time, it felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his chest, but he endured it. He had to. When the weekend finally arrived, Daniel put his plan into action. The night before their rendezvous, he checked into the same hotel, using a false name and paying in cash. He bribed the front desk clerk to give him access to the room Rachel and Mark had booked. Once inside, he carefully set up hidden cameras and microphones, ensuring that every moment of their affair would be recorded. The next morning, as Rachel packed her bag, telling him she was going on a work trip, Daniel remained calm. He watched her leave, her lies bitter on his lips as he kissed her goodbye. He knew where she was going, what she was planning to do, and he would be ready. Now, all he had to do was wait. Daniel sat alone in the darkened hotel room, his heart pounding in his chest. It was the night he had dreaded, and yet prepared for meticulously. The cameras were set, the microphones in place. Everything was ready. He glanced at the monitor on his laptop, watching the live feed from the hotel room Rachel and Mark would soon enter. The grainy black and white footage showed the empty room, waiting like a stage for the drama that was about to unfold. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second dragging with an agonizing weight. Daniel's mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days. Every text message, every phone call, every lie Rachel had told him as she packed her bag and left him behind. She had said she was going on a work trip, but Daniel knew better. She was about to meet Mark, the man she had chosen over her own husband. He thought back to their conversation that night at the kitchen table, when Rachel had sat him down and shattered his world with a cold, calculated confession. She had wanted an affair, but she had claimed it was just physical. As if those words were supposed to soften the blow, to make it somehow acceptable. But no matter how many times Daniel turned it over in his mind, he couldn't understand how she had convinced herself that this was something they could survive. She had made her choice, and now, Daniel was ready to make his. The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted Daniel out of his thoughts. He clicked back to the live feed, his pulse quickening as he saw them, Rachel and Mark, walking hand in hand toward the hotel entrance. His stomach churned with a sickening mix of anger, pain, and anticipation. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. Rachel was smiling, looking up at Mark with a softness that Daniel hadn't seen in her for months. She was dressed in a casual yet seductive way, a simple dress that clung to her in all the right places, her hair carefully styled. She looked like she was excited, ready for a romantic weekend with her lover. And Mark, of course, was all charm. Tall, confident, a man who had no idea what was waiting for him behind the scenes. They entered the hotel room, laughing quietly, oblivious to the cameras hidden in the walls, the microphones picking up every word. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to storm over there and confront them right then. But no, that wasn't the plan. He needed to stay in control, to see this through to the end. Inside the hotel room, Rachel and Mark settled in. Mark opened a bottle of wine, pouring 2 glasses as they talked about their workday, their plans for the weekend. The conversation was light, flirtatious. Rachel seemed relaxed, her laughter easy as she leaned into him, accepting his touch without hesitation. Daniel watched it all unfold, his hands shaking with fury. He had known this was coming, but seeing it happen, witnessing his wife in the arms of another man, was almost too much to bear. Still, he held back. He needed the proof, the undeniable evidence that would not only justify his decision to leave but would also give him the leverage he needed in the divorce. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the room became more intimate. Mark moved closer to Rachel, his hand brushing her arm, her leg, and soon they were kissing, deep, passionate, the kind of kiss that Daniel hadn't shared with Rachel in years. It was like a dagger in his heart, twisting and turning, but he kept his eyes on the screen, forcing himself to watch. He needed to see the whole truth, no matter how painful. Rachel broke the kiss for a moment, smiling at Mark as she stood up and excused herself to the bathroom. Daniel's eyes followed her on the screen as she walked out of view. His heart raced as he remembered what he had done earlier that day, the pepper spray. It had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, one fueled by a need for revenge, a need to make her suffer, even in a small way. He had sprayed her intimate apparel with the substance, knowing it would cause a painful reaction, though he wasn't sure when or how it would take effect. Rachel returned from the bathroom a few minutes later, looking slightly flushed but still smiling. She sat down next to Mark, and they continued where they had left off, their hands roaming freely now, their bodies pressed together. But something changed. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her face scrunching up in confusion. She pulled back from Mark, frowning. "I don't know what's wrong," she muttered, her voice barely audible through the microphone. She stood up, adjusting her dress and rubbing at her skin. "Something's off." Mark looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean? Are you okay?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She paced the room, her movements becoming more agitated. "I don't know, it's burning." she started scratching at her thighs, her discomfort rapidly turning into visible pain. Daniel watched with a grim satisfaction as the pepper spray began to take effect. Rachel's irritation grew, and soon she was rushing back to the bathroom, leaving Mark standing there, confused and concerned. Inside the bathroom, Rachel splashed cold water on her skin, trying to ease the growing discomfort, but it didn't help. The burning sensation only intensified, spreading through her body, making her wince in agony. She had no idea what was happening. Her romantic weekend was quickly turning into a nightmare. Mark knocked on the door, asking if she was okay, but Rachel snapped at him, her frustration and pain mounting. "Just give me a minute," she yelled, her voice cracking. Back in his own hotel room, Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching it all unfold. It wasn't the grand act of vengeance he had imagined, but seeing Rachel suffer, even in this small way, gave him a strange sense of satisfaction. She had brought this on herself. She had chosen to betray him, and now, she was paying the price. Eventually, Rachel emerged from the bathroom, but the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. She was no longer the confident, flirtatious woman who had walked in with Mark. She was uncomfortable, irritated, and the romantic excitement had evaporated. Mark, sensing her discomfort, tried to salvage the evening, but it was clear that things weren't going to go as planned. Rachel sat down on the bed, still rubbing at her skin, her expression a mix of frustration and pain. "I don't think I can do this," she muttered, glancing at Mark apologetically. Mark frowned, clearly disappointed but trying to be understanding. "It's okay. We can just relax, no pressure." But Rachel shook her head. "No, it's not okay. I don't feel right. I think I need to go home." Daniel couldn't help but smirk as he watched her unravel. The perfect weekend she had envisioned with her lover was crumbling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had thought she could have it all, Daniel's love, Mark's attention, but now, she was left with nothing but pain and regret. As Rachel and Mark began to pack up, their weekend ruined, Daniel closed his laptop. He had seen enough. The evidence was there, not just of the affair but of Rachel's complete disregard for their marriage. She had crossed the line, and now, it was time for Daniel to take the final step. He gathered the recordings, the emails, the texts, and compiled them into a neat folder for his lawyer. Tomorrow, Rachel and Mark would be served with legal papers, divorce for Rachel, and a lawsuit for Mark for alienation of affection. Daniel had already cleared out their joint accounts, ensuring that Rachel would have no access to their shared finances. He wasn't the same man who had sat across from Rachel at the kitchen table, blindsided by her confession. Now, he was in control, ready to confront her one last time, knowing that whatever happened next, he had already won. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, Daniel sat at the kitchen table once again. This time, however, the calm he felt was in stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted in his life just days before. The evidence had been gathered, the plans set in motion. Rachel was on her way home, and the papers were prepared, ready to be served. Today was the day everything would change. He had stayed awake most of the night, replaying the footage from the hotel over and over in his mind. Watching Rachel's discomfort, her failed attempts to enjoy her weekend with Mark, gave him a grim sense of closure. She had tried to justify her actions with talk of love and marriage, but the reality was clear, she had chosen betrayal. And now, she would have to face the consequences. Rachel pulled into the driveway just after 8 a.m., her face flushed with frustration and exhaustion. Daniel watched her from the kitchen window as she stepped out of the car, her movements stiff, her body still affected by the pepper spray that had ruined her weekend. She had left 2 days ago with excitement and anticipation, but now, she looked defeated. She walked into the house, dropping her bag on the floor with a heavy sigh. Daniel could feel the tension in the air as she glanced at him, her face showing a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. She hadn't expected him to be waiting for her. She probably thought she would have more time to prepare, to lie, to cover up what had happened. "Daniel," Rachel began, her voice hesitant, "we need to talk." But this time, it was Daniel who spoke first. "No, Rachel. We're done talking. Rachel blinked, taken aback by the coldness in his voice. She opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel cut her off, standing up and sliding a manila envelope across the table toward her. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "I already filed. You'll also notice that Mark has been served. I'm suing him for alienation of affection." Rachel's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. What are you talking about?" Daniel stared at her, his gaze hard and unyielding. "I know everything, Rachel. I've known since the moment you told me you wanted an affair. I've seen the emails, the texts, the phone calls. I even watched your weekend with Mark. All of it." Rachel paled, her body stiffening as the weight of his words sank in. You were spying on me?" "I had to protect myself," Daniel replied calmly. "You made your choice when you decided to betray me. I made mine when I decided to gather proof." For a moment, Rachel was speechless, her mind racing as she tried to comprehend the situation. She had never expected this. Daniel, her husband of 10 years, the man who had always been so quiet and steady, had turned the tables on her completely. The control she thought she had over the situation had evaporated, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. "You can't be serious," she finally said, her voice wavering. "Daniel, we can talk about this. We can work through it." "No," Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp and final. "We're past that. You said it was just physical, that you still loved me. But love doesn't look like this, Rachel. Love doesn't involve sneaking off with someone else and lying to my face." Rachel's eyes welled up with tears, but Daniel didn't waver. He had seen the footage, heard her lies, and felt the pain of her betrayal. Now, all that was left was to sever the ties that bound them. As Rachel stood there, struggling to process what was happening, Daniel could see the panic rising in her eyes. She had believed that she could have both, a stable marriage with him and the excitement of her affair with Mark. But now, with the divorce papers in hand, her illusion of control was shattering. You don't have to do this," Rachel pleaded, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake. I didn't think it through. Please, Daniel, we can fix this." Daniel shook his head, his expression hardened by the pain he had endured. "No, Rachel. You made your choice. And now, you have to live with it." Meanwhile, at Mark's office, the scene was equally tense. Mark had arrived at work, confident and unaware of the storm heading his way. That confidence evaporated the moment a process server walked in and handed him legal documents, papers informing him of Daniel's lawsuit for alienation of affection. Mark's face turned ashen as he read through the lawsuit, realizing that his affair with Rachel was now out in the open and about to ruin his life as well. Mark's colleagues watched in confusion as he stormed out of the office, his composure shattered. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for was now on the line. All because he had made the mistake of getting involved with a married woman. Back at the Thompson household, the confrontation between Daniel and Rachel continued. Rachel, now crying openly, begged him to reconsider, to give her another chance. She promised that she would end things with Mark, that she would do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Daniel remained resolute. "It's too late, Rachel," he said quietly. "You destroyed everything when you decided to put your own desires above our marriage. I've already packed your things. They're outside." Rachel's tears flowed freely now as she realized there was no saving this. Her belongings were packed in garbage bags on the front lawn, a cruel but fitting symbol of the life she had thrown away. She had believed she could juggle both worlds, but now she was being cast out of both. Mark was likely facing the collapse of his career, and Daniel, the man who had stood by her for so long, was finally walking away for good. "Where will I go?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel shrugged, his heart hardened by the pain she had caused. "That's not my problem anymore." Rachel left the house that day, her world in pieces. The life she had known for so long, the comfortable marriage, the stability, the safety, was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of her choices. She had lost everything in her pursuit of excitement, and now, all that remained was the emptiness left behind. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began the slow process of healing. The divorce moved forward, and the lawsuit against Mark proceeded as planned. Daniel had cleared out their joint accounts, changed the locks on the house, and started to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the pain of Rachel's betrayal still cut deep, when the loneliness crept in and the memories of their life together haunted him. But each day, he grew stronger. He began to focus on his own happiness for the first time in years. He spent more time with friends, threw himself into his work, and even considered dating again. The anger and resentment that had once consumed him slowly gave way to acceptance. Rachel's choices had hurt him deeply, but he had taken control of the situation, and that had given him the strength to move on. One evening, as Daniel sat in his now quiet and peaceful home, he reflected on the journey he had been through. The betrayal, the pain, the revenge, it had all been necessary for him to reach this point. He had loved Rachel, but he could no longer be with someone who had chosen to betray him so completely. Now, as he looked toward the future, Daniel felt a sense of release. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. He had survived the storm, and though he was scarred, he was free. His life was his own again, and that was enough.